During the mid-1970s, two small children would find themselves confronted by a mysterious figure whilst holidaying on the Isle of Wight. From their description of this bizarre entity, it still remains unclear whether the encounter was paranormal or extraterrestrial in nature. Join us as we explore the haunting story of the Sandown Clown. The Isle of Wight is England's largest and second most populated island, and lies a mere 4 miles from the shores of southern Hampshire. Over the years, many of the idyllic coastal communities which surround the island have grown to become busy tourist destinations, with one of the most popular being a small town situated on its southeastern coast named Sandown. The settlement and the bay in which it sits have been the site of a number of significant historical events, including an attempted invasion by French military forces. It was also the site of the loss of the Royal Navy training vessel HMS Eurydice, which remains one of Britain's worst peacetime disasters. But it would be a bizarre incident alleged to have taken place just outside the town during the Easter of 1973, which is perhaps the most unsettling to have occurred there. One which may be linked to a wider series of inexplicable events reported to have transpired at or around the same time, suggesting a hidden undercurrent of strange and mysterious incidents which are somehow associated with the town and its surrounding area. In May of that year, two young children named Harry and Faye were holidaying with their respective families at Lake Common, which is located not far from Sandown Airport. Both were around 7 years of age and had headed off together one afternoon into a swampy area which lay just outside the perimeter of the airfield. It was a bright and sunny day, and the two children could see several workers through the nearby chain-link fence which surrounded the facility going about their daily routine. But then, the quiet of the afternoon was suddenly broken by the loud blaring of a nearby siren, very similar to that of an ambulance. Standing and looking about themselves for the source of this interruption, the two children had initially assumed that something significant must have occurred inside the airport. But to their surprise, the various mechanics there had continued to carry out their duties, seemingly oblivious to the sound as it rang out across the distance. Deciding to investigate further, the pair then set off away from the fence, making their way along a well-trodden footpath deeper into the adjoining marshy ground. They had not travelled far and were just approaching a small pedestrian footbridge when the sound of the alarm unexpectedly ceased. Moments later, a truly bizarre-looking shape had slowly clambered out from beneath the wooden bridge, prompting the two children to crouch down and hide in the nearest undergrowth. They watched on as an overly tall figure unfolded itself into a fully upright position, and then started to labour its way towards a patch of nearby open water. Both would later relate how this person's gait was exceptionally stiff and awkward, as if they were completely unaccustomed to walking. But however unusual the figure's manner of movement may have been, its visual appearance was even more astounding to the two onlookers. Although outwardly resembling an adult male, they noted how it didn't seem to have a neck, instead exhibiting a pointed head, which seemed to have been planted firmly atop its square shoulders. Either side of its face, where there should have been ears, was instead a pair of small antennae. Its skin was of an exceptionally pale complexion, presenting as bright white in appearance. Equally as outlandish were the clothes it was wearing, which included a torn bright green tunic and a grimy yellow hat which was topped off with some form of rounded metallic bauble. Upon reaching the water, the figure appeared to drop something, and then began to flail around erratically as if it was struggling to bend down and retrieve the object. When it started to move off again, with an odd combination of shuffling and hopping, it disappeared from view through a dense clump of trees situated a short distance away. A minute or so later, the siren-like sound which the children had heard earlier then resumed, emanating from the tree line into which the multicolored stranger had disappeared. This prompted some debate between the pair, with Harry suggesting they head back to the airfield and Faye arguing that they should follow the stranger into the trees. As it turned out, Faye would have her way. Almost immediately after entering the tree line, the pair encountered the 7-foot-tall entity in a small clearing, this time holding an equally strange-looking device in one of its hands. During a subsequent interview with investigators, Faye would describe this as a microphone of some description, apparently connected to its chest by a length of white cable. It was from this contraption that the blaring sound was being emitted, although it was not being held anywhere near the figure's face or mouth. As the children emerged into the clearing, the slender figure turned to face them, causing Harry to turn and run. But as Faye had also gone to flee, she had suddenly heard an odd metallic voice in her head, pleading with her not to leave and reassuring her that she was in no danger. When Harry nervously rejoined her, the two children slowly approached the waiting stranger, who then put away the odd device and walked forwards to greet them. With apparent difficulty, the colourful entity then produced a small notepad and pen, proceeding to write out the words, "Hello, I am all colours Sam." An awkward pause then followed, before the stranger then began to speak in the same bizarre metallic tone that Faye had heard in her head. The children noted that as it did so, the crude yellow lips which seemed to comprise its mouth were not actually moving. This odd feature, along with a square nose and triangular patches where the eyes should have been, gave Faye the impression that Sam was wearing some kind of mask. After a brief conversation, the stranger then asked the children to accompany him to his home, which was situated a short distance away. Having persuaded themselves that despite its odd appearance this being was not a danger to them, Harry and Faye agreed to do so. After following him a short distance, they eventually came to a rectangular metallic structure which was hidden further away in the marshes. Both children maintained that this construction was sparsely furnished, with chairs and a heating element, and walls covered with gauges and dials of varying descriptions. Here, the stranger shared a simple meal of berries and water with Harry and Faye, who were then bewildered by the bizarre manner in which he ate. He inserted the berries into a small aperture located beneath one of the antennae on the side of his head, and then jerked his head to one side. Seconds later, the children saw the berry apparently pass behind one of Sam's triangular eyes, before briefly appearing within his mouth, where it then disappeared. As time passed, they questioned Sam regarding who he was and where he came from, listening to his stilted and often confusing replies. He explained that he was not like them and that he stayed away from people in the forest, as he feared they would attack him for being different. He reassured the children by stating that he was not a monster and that he was also not a ghost either. He then bade them farewell, shuffling alongside them for a short distance back to the tree line before heading back in the direction of his home. Initially, the children had decided to keep their encounter to themselves. However, Faye eventually disclosed the incident to her father, prompting a brief search of the marshes for the mysterious stranger and his metal abode, though no trace of either was found. Whilst initially dismissive of his daughter's and her friend's account, Faye's father soon became firmly convinced as to the validity of her story. He would later inform investigators that the high level of detail she had provided regarding Sam's appearance had not deviated or varied in any way over the course of repeated questioning. Furthermore, the incident she described was not so dissimilar from two other inexplicable events he himself had experienced during the last few years on previous visits to the location. 3 years prior, during October of 1970, Faye's family had again been holidaying on the Isle of Wight, staying with friends at their house in nearby Shanklin. One evening, her father was driving across the island to visit another friend in Ryde when he had suddenly become aware of what he assumed was a low-flying aircraft. Slowing down, he observed a series of bright red lights rapidly descending from the night sky, before coming to a hover above the adjoining marshlands. The lights, about 7 or 8 in total, were all distributed in a wide ring around a cylindrical metal fuselage, unlike anything he had ever seen before. As he watched on, they then began to move quickly across the marshes, travelling at exactly the same speed and in exactly the same direction as his car. Suddenly the lights rose up and rotated in a wide circle above his vehicle, before banking sharply to resume their parallel trajectory once again. The lights then repeated this manoeuvre, making no sound whatsoever, before Faye's father pulled over to the side of the road. He retrieved a torch from the glove box and then exited the vehicle, shining the beam up at the object, which then quickly receded into the darkness. But as soon as he got back in the car and restarted the engine, the lights again moved closer, seemingly engaging in a peculiar game of cat and mouse. This sequence of events repeated itself twice more during the journey, with Faye's father stopping and shining his torch at the unknown object, before it then retreated from view each time. In essence, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being stalked until it disappeared altogether, as he neared his intended destination. On another evening in March of 1972, Faye's father had again been travelling across the Isle of Wight when he experienced a strong compulsion to drive to the nearby cliffs. Parking up and exiting his vehicle, he had detected a deep droning sound, clearly audible above the crashing of the surf against the base of the precipice. Sitting down and scanning the stormy waters, he could not see anything that might account for the odd hum, despite a strong feeling that he was being observed. Just then, a pair of bright yellow lights suddenly appeared beneath the surface of the waters, projecting upwards at the cliff face where he was sitting. Whilst recounting his story in a magazine interview, Faye's father described the lights as small and circular, as if they were the eyes of a sea monster. But like the object he had seen 2 years earlier, when he went to fetch his camera from his car, he found that the 2 lights below had disappeared upon returning to the cliff face. They then rematerialized after he had replaced the device in the car, as if whatever was generating them was aware of his intention. After several minutes, the lights then retreated from the coast, heading further out to sea. As they did so, they had fixed him within their beams until they faded away altogether, leaving Faye's father feeling utterly alone and lost in the confusion of what he had just experienced. During an interview with the British UFO Research Association in 1978, Faye's father went as far as to state that he believed her experiences were directly linked to his own. That whatever beings had observed him during his stay on the island had clearly elected to engage with his daughter as well. He was unable to give an explanation as to what the enigmatic All Colours Sam may have been, but was sure the entity had not meant the two children any harm. Instead, he believed it was simply continuing an ongoing process of monitoring and observation of his family whilst they were on the Isle of Wight. In the years since, the incident concerning All Colours Sam has become known as the Sandown Clown, due to the colourful attire that the strange visitor was described as wearing. It has sharply divided the opinions of those who have taken the time to dissect the events as described by those involved. The fact that neither of the children's families chose to name themselves in interviews has been seized upon as indicative that the story was a hoax. With no evidence that the police or anyone else in a position of authority had been party to the case, and only the reports of UFO researchers submitted as evidence of the event, it's understandable that many commentators have trouble giving the story any credence. No trace of Sam's home has ever been found, despite repeated visits to the area and even questioning of local residents. This has led to speculation that this was, at best, a tall tale by two small children, and at worst, a cunning attempt to try and increase tourist trade in the region. The idea of a being that presents as truly bizarre in nature, trying hard but ultimately failing to pass itself off as something more familiar, is one commonly associated with close encounters of the third kind, especially where children are involved. There is a theory that Sam's bizarre appearance may not have been the entity's true form, but instead only appeared as such in the minds of Harry and Faye, so as to present as more approachable. Sam's home may similarly have been constructed for this purpose, having never really existed. Those who have reported encounters with the alleged men in black also describe a similar phenomenon, in which facial features such as noses or ears are oddly misrepresented and sometimes missing altogether, or they have penetrating eyes that don't blink. Most encounters with men in black are entirely benign, despite the more frightening accounts. Many believe these beings are extraterrestrial in nature, and that their intention is only to study human beings up close without causing too much distress in the subject. It is entirely possible that Sam was an emissary from beyond the stars, wanting to assess the children, but ultimately meaning them no harm. There are those who believe he may have been a type of pixie or fairy, perhaps a woodland spirit, which are mentioned repeatedly in common folklore of the British Isles. And of course, there is always the possibility that Sam was a vagrant or local eccentric playing a trick on the children, despite no evidence of any such person living in or frequenting that area. In the end, the encounter is certainly unlike any other visitation on record, either in the United Kingdom, or for that matter, any other part of the world. That said, and as we will continue to discover, this is only one of many such bizarre encounters from across the globe, with entities that simply do not exist in day-to-day life. If Sam was indeed another entity attempting to pass itself off as something whimsical and child-friendly, then the question remains: who or what was behind the mask? you want to go out?